Hey guys, it's Carolyn. Welcome back to the podcast. And today we're going to talk about something that everybody needs to work on at all times, communication, public speaking. I know this was a huge fear of mine. I actually took classes on it. And now I speak on stages all the time. And over the years, have become much more comfortable with it. I know at first it's nerve wracking, but Philip Sessions here today to tell us how to do it well, what we're doing wrong in communication, and how we can communicate better. Good morning, Philip. How are you?
Morning. I am great. How about you?
Good. Thank you so much for taking some time to be on the show. Before we dive into the topic, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are now.
So, about me, I am probably the conundrum of what you would think of a speaker, the typical or untypical what you would expect. I have a background in electrical engineering and I've turned myself into a speaker. So if anybody can turn themselves into a speaker, you can, because I am supposed to be that guy that just sits behind the computer, punches away, the keyboard warrior, never gets out there in front of people, and I changed my life to do that. But more than that, I am a father of two beautiful little girls, a 2.5-year old and a 2-month old. So the house is crazy right now. And of course, I have my lovely wife who helps hold the house down. I don't know how she's doing it right now before she goes back to her nursing job. I'm sure she's ready to go back, but she's dealing with that. And I have a background in manufacturing. So working for BMW manufacturing, actually, and everything, doing project management, being an engineer, all of these things, and learning all about this is what I've been able to do is learn about speaking, communication, learn how to communicate with people of multiple language backgrounds, geographical backgrounds, backgrounds in intellect, whether they're a line worker, whether they're a manager, whether they're also another engineer, IT person. Believe it or not, we all can't communicate. And so I've learned from trial and error how to get better at that. But that's really kind of me in a nutshell. Moved from the Houston area. So I know we were talking about that offline back in 2015 to Greenville, South Carolina. Miss my Texas, the pride there, amazing stuff. But I love it over here in South Carolina where I'm at with my family now.
So, how did you go from electrical engineer to public speaking coach, communication coach?
Yeah. So while I was actually at BMW was a thing that happened for me. So I was an engineer and I had this entrepreneurial bug. All my family has been entrepreneurs, whether they were farmers from like great grandparents and everything to having their own automotive workshop. And my dad actually did landscaping and everything. But all my uncles and several aunts were all business owners. And so that was kind of in my blood, but I decided to take that safe route, go the engineering route. I was good at math and everything. But I was doing fitness coaching at the time because I did some bodybuilding shows and wanted to do that. But I was getting burnt out from that. And there was this opportunity at BMW with this $10 title of leadership and transformation specialist. And I thought, you know what? That would be really cool. I've led teams before, not as a titled leader or anything, but I've led a lot of teams, led a lot of people. And I thought, leadership coaching might be something I want to do. Well, God works in mysterious ways, and I got put into the professional development side. That's where they put me rather than the leadership. And there was identified that presentation skills was something that needed to be worked on for the company. And that's kind of when that light bulb went off. Well, I've already been speaking on a few stages. I've seen how learning to speak better for myself has transformed my personal life, my career, and BMW, this a massive and amazing company, has decided this is a skill that their people need. So there has to be a market for this. And so at first I started out with like, oh, I'm going to do engineers. And I've kind of bounced around who I wanted to. I've found full circle kind of coming back to really focusing in on manufacturing and helping leaders and engineers be able to speak to diverse audiences. But really, that role at BMW was kind of that catalyst for me to then start my own business doing presentation coaching.
That's cool. So, how important is effective communication?
Oh, it every issue I've ever seen and I've ever had to deal with came down to poor communication. Maybe not even a lack of communication. There's definitely a lack of communication that happens a lot of times, but poor communication. What you have going on in your head, what I have going on in my head, unfortunately, even if you've been married for 30 years, you tend to not be able to know what the other person's thinking. yet we always want to start our communication based on our knowledge. So that's what I found to be be that it's just a lack of communication, of proper communication.
So what do most people get wrong in communication and in communicating with other people?
They think about how to communicate with somebody exactly like them, like the way that I want to be communicated to, with the knowledge that I have is, of course, Carolyn, that's the way that you're going to take information. You're going to know everything I know. You're going to want to be talked to exactly the same way I want to be talked to. No. But that's how everybody talks. And it's natural. I mean, we're humans. We just That's what we tend to think. And to kind of give a good example of this, think about creating a standard operating procedure. When you're writing that the first time, I didn't put control C. I just said, hey, copy here, click over here and paste it. Well, I didn't say right click copy or control C, control V, all that stuff. I just assumed that person had that knowledge. And that's the problem in an SOP is we go and we write like three things, three paragraphs, maybe explaining what to do. And you hand it to somebody that's never done it. And they're like, what do I do? I don't know what website do I go to? Oh yeah, I forgot to put that. Okay, well, how do I log in? Oh yeah, I forgot to give you the login information. And there's all these things that we just intuitively know that we forget to put in that SOP. And it's the same thing with our communication. It's so common sense to us now because we've been ingrained in it. We've done it so much, and yet we don't realize that other people don't have all that knowledge. And so that's really like where it all falls, that we just expect everybody has the same knowledge as us and we can just communicate to that.
So how do you fix that? How do you come at it from a different approach? What does that look like?
You have to try and put yourself in the other person's shoes. And it's not always going to be perfect if you know the person and what they do and don't know. Obviously, very easy. You can start speaking to them that way. But if you don't know them, you do have to make some generalities. Are they a manager? So if they're a manager, they're probably not going to know all the technical stuff. They're not going to be in the project and know all those things. Or if they're a customer, we're talking about construction. So the customer doesn't understand why something would cost $20,000. I mean, all you're doing is coming in and digging a hole real quick, or you're just putting up some sheetrock. Like, why is it so much money? Well, then you have to, if you go into the detail, then you explain, well, hey, we have to have these people that we have to bring in. The material is this much. We have to pay the people this amount of money. We have to carry this kind of insurance. And when we're doing your job, we're also not doing this other job that we could have done because we're doing your job. And so there's a lot of things that go into the cost and the pricing behind what you're doing. And that's just an example for you. But we need to go and educate people more on that and come from where they're coming at. Because if I just said, yeah, it's going to cost $20,000 to dig that hole. What? Just to dig some dirt? It's going to cost $20,000. But if you go and explain how many hours it's going to take, what kind of equipment you're going to need, the special operator for that, then that starts to justify that. Oh, okay, I can see. Yeah, you're going to take 20 hours to dig that hole versus it's only going to take you 10 minutes, because unfortunately a lot of people think, oh, that won't take that long. And even if it doesn't take a lot of time, what skills and expertise have you had to learn and put on your staff in order to be able to get that job done that quickly? And so these are things that we need to look at the person we're speaking to and try and understand and figure out what they do and don't know and communicate to that. And I always like to say, like, over communicate. And another example for you real quick is when I was talking to my wife, we had this ant infestation one time, and we've got dog food in a dog food bowl that our dog eats out of, that's right there in the breakfast nook. But then we also have a dog food container that's in the laundry room. Well, I was talking to the dog food bowl in the dog food container in the laundry room, but I just said, oh my gosh, there's ants by the dog food. Well, then 30 minutes later, my wife comes by and she's like, oh my gosh, there's also ants in here in the laundry room next to the dog food. And I'm like, that's what I was saying, but I didn't say that. In my mind, I said that because I had that information, but she didn't. And this is exactly what happens to us in every project that goes on, and really every conversation that we have, is we speak on the knowledge we have and not to what we think the other person has, or giving them enough information that it can fill in a lot of those gaps of the knowledge they may not have.
No, and I think that's and from contractors who are generally not great communicators, um, and always need communication. A lot of
Pick up the phone. That's the first thing. Pick up the phone, call back, and you're going to be light years ahead of any other contractor.
I know, and you get out of so most of legal disputes, right, where we end up, you're getting sued,
Mm,
or almost all of the time based on ineffective communication, right? And
yeah.
so we go back to, okay, so you need to tell them, but you also need a contract that somebody can read that's effective, because yes, we need to communicate. That communication is to manage expectations, right? And they're
Mm,
coming at it from a view of, well, I saw this on HGTV and it only took a week and it only cost this much money, so you should be able to do the same thing. So I think effective communication, especially in the construction industry where people don't know what's going to happen, how long it's
yeah.
going to take, or is essential to avoiding legal disputes.
Yeah, yeah, and I also saw a lot of people on HDTV that are butterfly catchers that have a $2.3 million budget for a house. So
Yes, exactly.
let's be
Yeah,
real here.
I know, but that's what homeowners have is a real,
Yeah.
this is what it is, and
Oh
it's not,
yeah.
until you're actually in it and actually do it, and especially people who have never done projects before, it's completely different than what you expect. And
Yes, yes. And one thing I like to say with that is a lot of times you'll have these verbal conversations. What you need to go back and do is put that in an email, a
absolutely,
text message, and you'll know better about this than me. A text message doesn't hold the same weight from a legal standpoint as an email will. And within the email, one thing I like to do to communicate is, hey, per our conversation, here's what we talked about. And if this is incorrect, please respond to me in email. And if they don't respond, then that means that it was correct because you asked them to respond if something wasn't incorrect. And now that seems like, oh, Philip, why do I need to put all that? But from a legal perspective, I have written down via email what we talked about. So now that it is in written form because again, we communicate and sometimes what we hear is not what we actually registered. This happens with my wife all the time where she'll tell me one thing, hey, can you take out the trash? Okay. In my mind, I'm like, oh, cool. I'll take it out when I go outside next. That might be 30 minutes from now. In my wife's mind, and it depends on the situation, no, I should do it right now. And now she's going to be mad because I didn't do it right now. Now, that's a totally different situation, but she should have told me that, hey, go take that trash out now. I want you to take the trash out now, not in 30 minutes. But of course she didn't. And so the same thing when we hear, hey, we need this done on the job, you're hearing, okay, this, and this need to happen, but you're not, but that may not be what the customer even wanted. So when you write that down on paper, now you're able to say, hey, this is what we talked about. I wrote it to you. You never had any disagreements with it. And now you can go backdate to, hey, back on March 15th, we talked about this. I sent an email. There was nothing saying that you want to change anything different. And we were able to move forward and we moved forward based on that conversation. And now you have something to go to. And again, the legal thing, he who has the most documentation is most likely going to win. Again, not 100%, but it's going to help you with your business. And I see you laughing here, so I'm
yeah,
gonna let
I,
you
I
chime in on
agree.
that.
I agree because that's it's my dream to have a email documented, and we can use text message, but I think email is easier to use as evidence because it's easier to pull.
Yeah,
But I always tell my contractors, follow up with an email. This is what, because then it has that evidence, and hopefully you'll never need it. But
yeah.
that one time you need it and you don't have it, will teach you that it is essential, and it verifies that you're on the same page. And I think there is different boundaries just between men and women because I think their
Hmm.
brains work differently. I think the husband wife thing is a great thing, but
Yeah,
even in construction projects, or we're just wired differently, and so our brains usually get to the same place, just a very different way.
yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
All right, so you coach people. How do you help people get over their fear of public speaking?
It starts with figuring out what you're going to talk about and building up that confidence. So it depends on the situation there, how which side I'll attack first. But if you lack that confidence, I really help build up that confidence in that person. And so that may be through simple things that just like, hey, look, you have that information, you have that knowledge. There's no reason why you can't go and speak in front of people because you know more than them. But that's the problem a lot of times, is that we're like, we know so much, but we also don't know a lot. It's like, as you get educated more in a certain topic, you start to realize how much you don't know. And so that's typically what trips people up, is that they don't feel confident they know everything. But the thing is, when you are speaking with a customer or a somebody that's working with you that doesn't have all the information you have, if you forget something, if you don't give them all the completely correct information or whatever, you give them enough for them to learn, not to be a master at what it is that you're trying to teach them on, they're still going to learn a lot. And
Mhm.
the basics that are super basic to us is really something that is super complex for people that are not in the weeds. And so that's something I try and educate on. And then when you know what you're trying to talk about and you have a clear path to how you're going to present that information, it becomes a lot easier. And that goes back and builds up that confidence as well. If I go into a tough conversation and I know, hey, I can expect that this and this are probably going to come up as rebuttals. So let me make sure I'm prepared for that, to be able to have that conversation, have that information ready. And I know I want to cover XYZ. It's going to be a lot better conversation, and we're going to move along, essentially agenda in a meeting, if you will, versus, oh, we're just going to kind of come in and, hopefully we'll talk about what we want to talk about. I mean, I set up a meeting with them, and well, they know what to talk about, and I know what to talk about. No, you have to have a plan. And when you have that plan and have the self-confidence in yourself and your message, that's going to get you in the right direction. So that's where I start to help build up that confidence in people that lack the confidence in speaking.
And the thing is that even if you're an expert in the field, you don't necessarily know everything.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if somebody has a question, if you don't know, so be like, I don't know, but I could find out, right? You don't
Yes.
have to know everything. And like when I talk on contracts or when I talk on collections, I'm giving a basic general overview, which people have no idea. So that's a lot of information to them.
Mhm.
Especially if somebody's going to talk on, an industry specific idea that I know nothing about, it's going to be a ton of information I didn't have before I listened to that, right? So it doesn't have
Yeah.
to be everything. Um,
Yeah.
but to give you the confidence, and then, in my experience, the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Exactly, exactly. And so I like to say, let's start doing videos. I mean, that's the easiest way. You've got a phone already, you've spent $1,000 on it. Why not use that? And you've got social media, it's free, or maybe you have social media, it's free. Start posting videos. You're going to look stupid at first, but guess what? Your mom and a couple of family members are going to see it, maybe a couple of friends, and they love you. They know you're great. And so it's not going to be terrible. But just start, and eventually more and more people are going to see it. But by the time they see it, you're
You're
actually
better.
going to be good, because you've been doing this time and time and time again.
I know, I
So
can
start
remember
with
me
video.
with my first videos. If I go back and watch them, like, oh my god, that was terrible.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah. I mean, yeah, podcast too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Same thing for me. I go back and look, and like, oh my gosh. Even like 3 years ago, I go back and look at some podcast interviews that I've done, and I'm like, wow. I mean, I just talk so monotone. Like my voice, I noticed my voice at the normal level was even deeper, because I talk so monotone. I like talked in my throat and everything like that. And it was just, it was terribly monotone. And so I've learned to have this vocal variety and vocal variation and everything over time, but I had to start putting in the reps. And I
Like,
mean, it's just like you trying to put a frame, framing up in a house. At first, you're going to suck at it. You're probably going to put too many wrong nails. You're going to hit your thumb so many times for trying to hold the nail and try to hit it the first time. But after a while, that frame is perfectly straight every time. You hold the nail and boom, you knock it in one shot, rather than I've got to hit it 50, 60 times just to get the nail in all the way into the 2x4. Eventually, you get better at being a carpenter. And the same thing with speaking. You'll get better at speaking with the reps.
so there's another side of communication that when we talk about stuff like this is not brought up much, but I think it's important. How important is the listening side of communication?
Oh, especially like in sales and everything, but really in life in general, the listening side is the best thing. So, for example, I had I was working on a project, and there was a project manager and then my manager at the time. And the project manager was trying to get approval for me as the engineer to come in and be able to help support. his project as well as the projects I was already working on. And I was well over capacity. And my manager, I knew on the back end that he really didn't want me to go over to there to support that project because he didn't really think that was a good use of my time. But from a politically correct standpoint, he went ahead and said, "Oh yeah, yeah, Philip can support you on that project." And I talked with the project manager afterwards, and I'm like, "No, this can't happen." He's like, "What do you mean? Your manager said it would be okay." I said, "You didn't read between the lines." While maybe he said that, if you look around at what's going on, there's no way, one, that I can do that. You already know my capacity, but two, you know that he's not going to be willing to give up the resource of me to go to a different department to help out, like, a completely different project to help out. You just literally took the words he said at face value. So he didn't really listen and then apply like the surrounding information and take some logic in that as well. So listening is very important, not just to the literal words, but the way they say it. I mean, I'm sure you and I both can go back to a spousal conversation where we heard one thing, but it really meant another thing. Like I said with the trash. Like my wife said, take out the trash. Okay, I heard that. I'll take it out later. And that's what I said. I didn't communicate, hey, I'll take it out in 30 minutes. And so it was a failure on my part too. But it was something she wanted done now. And I didn't hear that in the tone of her voice or anything. And so that's the thing. Like, you need to listen. And if you don't know the urgency behind the task asked of you, the information said to you, ask some prying questions. So it's about asking questions. So listening and asking for further clarification and everything. And then
And
going
we
back and repeating what was said afterwards as well. Okay, so hey, do you want me to take out the trash now, or is it okay if I take it out 30 minutes later? Oh, I need you to take it out now. Okay, so and obviously a silly example, but okay, so what I'm hearing from you is you want me to take out the trash now, correct? Yes, I mean, obviously that would be very annoying in a situation like that, but in a higher stakes situation, that's what you would do. You would kind of repeat the information back to make sure that you heard it correctly before moving forward.
I agree. And I think listening from the standpoint of you're really listening to what the person's saying, not just listening to respond.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think, especially in tough conversations, that can be a problem too.
Yes. Oh yeah. That's usually where we all get tripped up the most, when the emotions are high, the logic is low. Like the brain just shuts off and we're just ready to fight, we're ready to respond. And a lot of times if you just stay calm, cool and collected, that situation will never get escalated, because it's very hard if somebody's up here, they're pissed off, they're yelling at you, and you're just constantly like, yeah, I get that, we're working on that, and you're just calm. Eventually they're going to be like, well, why in the world am I so pissed off? If Carolyn is down here and she's as calm as can be, why am I so pissed off? And eventually I start becoming calmer and calmer and calmer. So, and it's a tough thing to do in those situations, but the more you can keep the emotions out of the conversation, the better it's going to be in the long run.
I agree. I agree, which is very challenging,
Yeah.
especially
Oh,
when you
very
have
challenging.
criticizing your work or yeah, whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, the tough situations. So, for somebody who's getting ready to been asked to talk to a group or public speaking, and they have a topic they're going to talk to, how do they create an outline? What does that look like?
I like to stick with an outline. Some people like writing literally every single word out. I have found in my experience from working with people, when they write everything out and they go to speak on stage, they miss one sentence in their fully written out outline. They're literally word for word what they're going to say. And now they're tripped up and oh, sorry, I missed this thing. And they want to go back to it. The audience doesn't know what you wrote out, so it doesn't matter if you happen to skip it or not, unless it's something imperative that you have to share, or you said something completely incorrect, like, oh, 2 plus 2 is 16. Well, oh, sorry, I misspoke there. 2 plus 2 is 4. Like something like that, you're going to go back, and that's okay to correct, and you should, because you want to make sure you give factual information. But don't write everything out, because that's going to trip you up more, because you're going to try and remember where you're at and say everything word for word, and it's not going to come off as natural. So I would start with an outline. And how I would do that is first by figuring out what do you want to get across to that audience in the first place? What is that outcome that you have in mind that you want and you believe the audience would want as well? So for this podcast here, it's about how to communicate properly. So I know you had some questions and you're kind of guiding this here, but you had an idea of the things that we wanted to talk about, and the outcome overall was to learn how to communicate better. And then from there, you figure out what are some talking points that I can talk about in there. And so you create talking points around communication that we can talk about, failures that people have, some things to help them overcome the nervousness of speaking in front of people, things like that. Figure out those talking points, and then finally have some stories to share with that, because facts tell and stories sell. People remember how you make them feel, and they remember the stories that you share, and can learn a lot better from a story versus just factual information. If people could learn from factual information, they would just go read a textbook.
Yeah.
But they're there to listen to you. They're there to learn from your experiences and your stories. So you start with the overarching theme. What do you want that outcome to be? Create some bullet points around that, and finally fill that in with stories based on what you've experienced. And then if you can add what will relate with your audience, then do that as well. I could have given a bunch of examples of manufacturing when I started to give a story or an analogy based on the point I was trying to make. But instead, I try to find points that were either about, my spouse, because a lot of us are married or can understand a relationship, and also construction, because this is a construction podcast. So that's how you would go about doing that, trying to make them relatable to that audience. And that's how I would go about that outline.
So do you practice?
Yes, and then practice after that. So have that outline, and I always say the introduction is the most important thing, because one, it's going to let people know whether they should listen to you or not, and two, it's people are going to say, "Do I want to listen to this speaker or not?" And so you really want to get that introduction nailed down first of all, and then start to work on the rest of the speech after that. But yeah, I would go through that. And so some ways that you could do that is, and I would strongly suggest recording yourself. If it's you sitting down in a computer chair, just recording yourself so you can go back and watch it, that's great. But if you have the opportunity, if you have the space, I would stand up and try and walk around the room as much as you can and look at your body. How is your body looking? How are you talking? And what are the words that you're using? And if you have a friend that's willing to listen to you ramble on for the 20 or 30 minutes and give you feedback, that'd be great as well. But you could take that recording and look at it, just, both video and audio, then just video. See, how are you moving? Are you literally sitting still, looking petrified while you're talking? Are you actually using your hands? Are you looking around the room as you're talking, trying to emulate you talking to different people in the audience? And then finally, just listen with only audio so you can tell what words are you emphasizing. Are you actually monotone the whole time and just really boring? Or are you they're exciting? It's just is the emotion coming out in your voice with that? And so you can start to assess yourself and then go back and fix one thing at a time. Don't try and fix everything. Take some notes on everything, but fix one thing at a time, and just kind of continue to repeat that process with the amount of time that you have. So that really depends on what kind of time you have to be able to practice more and more.
What goes into a good introduction? What should you put in your introduction that would make people want to listen?
So a question related with what you're going to talk about, I like to state up front what we're going to talk about. That way people know. So you can have a question or a fact that kind of helps, go segue into that. But letting people know up front, and it may even literally be like, and today we're going to talk about how to communicate more effectively. But why I like to do that is because it lets people know, like, hey, oh, I'm great at communicating, I don't need this. Or, oh, hey, man, I kind of suck at communicating, I better listen in. And so it allows people to know whether to tune in or not. And just like the hook on a video that gets you captured to actually watch the rest of the video, it's the same thing with the speech. You're trying to hook people in to stick around because, oh, hey, this is what I want to learn about. I want to learn how to communicate more effectively. So I better stick around and listen to this whole podcast episode. So I would say that. And then if you have a story that's related to your message, and that can segue into the points that you're going to do. That's a beautiful way to do that as well. And I would not, if you're going to share like questions or kind of give this like introduction that's not necessarily a story, or even with the story, I would be hesitant to make it be something that's like 5 minutes long. You want to make sure somewhere in there that you're saying like, "Hey, we're going to talk about effective communication today, but first let me tell you about a story of a time that maybe I had a terrible communication experience, or I was terrible at communication." And maybe you go in and tell a funny story, and then you start to get into your actual speech. But you want to make sure pretty early within the first minute that you're letting people know what your speech is about, so they can know whether they should be listening or not. Because the trouble with the story, unless if it's super engaging, most people, even with the story, like, okay, cool, well, I'm tired of listening. I don't know what the punchline is, so let's get to the punchline. And especially if you're at business conferences, I mean, we're go go go. We want to know now, especially as Americans, like, tell me now what I need to know so I can know whether I should listen or not, or if I can go to the bathroom. So you want to tell them up front pretty quickly how, what you're going to talk about.
And do you go into any like your expertise or how much years of experience you have or anything about you?
That's situation dependent. So a lot of times, if there's a MC or a host or something, they're probably going to say that about you. And if that's the case, they say, oh, Philip does this and that. He's been this great person. Da 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 da. I don't need to go and repeat that. If they don't, you could give some, like, a couple of bullet points of who you are. I wouldn't start like right away. Hi, I'm Philip Sessions, and this is what I do. Da da da. I would maybe ask a question or something real quick, and then I would say a couple of things about me, like, here's who I am, why I'm here, why I should be listened to. Essentially, giving you the credibility that, hey, I do this, XYZ, and this is why you should listen to me, essentially, without obviously saying this is why you should listen to me. But if you don't have an MC, yeah, give a couple of bullet points, a synopsis of who you are, what makes you an expert in the topic that you're about to talk about, so people can know whether to listen to you or not as well.
Gotcha. And how does effective communication make you a better leader?
I think it's imperative. I mean, really, just for anybody, but especially as a leader, because from a leader's perspective, you are expected to be able to meet the person where they're at. And that, to me, that's where what the leader should be doing more. I think everybody should be trying to meet the other person, but a leader, that is the expectation, that you are leading people. That is your job. You're no longer doing the technical stuff. You're not doing the work by hand. You are leading people. You are in the business of people. So you need to meet people where they're at. And so effective communication is imperative, because if you just try to speak to people exactly how you want to be spoken to, you're not going to lead people for long, unless if you happen to somehow you get a team of people exactly like you, which is probably what's going to happen over time if you stay in that position. But you have to go meet the people where they're at. So it's imperative as a leader to have effective communication.
All right. So tell me about like your coaching services. What if somebody wanted to work with you? What does that look like?
So I work with either companies or on one-on-one basis. So for the company side, what I'll do, and it could be virtual or in person, where I can come in and we can do, I guess, depending on what the travel and stuff looks like, usually anywhere from a 2, a 4, or an 8 hour workshop. So 2 hour half day or a full day workshop, or we can make it a multiple day workshop where we talk about these communication skills. How do we present within a meeting? How do we present going to clients? And we talk about different, really, I like to call it executive presentation skills. So how are we presenting ourselves? How do we craft that message and convey this information so we can win the bid, so we can move forward in the project, give that status update? And so I usually make that custom to the company and what they need, who their people are. But then I also teach, how do you learn, maybe even on the fly, a little bit of how to communicate with the different audiences. And if you've got an audience of a vast amount of different people, how do you make sure to communicate with each individual? So we really talk about how to tailor your message to impact the audience and touch the audience so they can understand and be able to make a decision based on that. And then on an individual basis, we go in and really, there's the game plan is we're going to figure out where you're at and we're going to take you to where you want to go in a nutshell. So a lot of people come to me, I've got a speech coming up, and usually, unfortunately, it's like 2 or 3 weeks they want to do that. And I have been able to pull that out. I've been able to actually, there was a startup I helped them overnight. Essentially, they had a presentation, and it was like they left out. They're like, "Hey, we're going to the Department of Energy. We're trying to get $250,000 so we can continue to work on our project." And they're like, "Hey," and part of it they kind of had to do this, but they're like, "Hey, here's what we've done. Here's what we're thinking about doing." And that was kind of it. I'm like, "So, what are you going to do with this money when I give it to you?" They're like, "I don't know." Well, they kind of have had ideas, but they didn't talk about it. And so I'm like, well, you need to let them know the plans for it, because everybody wants to know the plans. Everybody wants to know that something is going to happen. And that's kind of leadership 101. People will follow you if you have a clear path for them to follow. And so, same thing with the speaking. So, going back to the people that I work with on an individual basis, that's what we do. We create a plan for them. So, I've got a speech coming up, and so we'll dive into that outline. Okay, what is it that you want out of that? Who's the audience? What's the message and some bullet points that you want to get across to educate them on? And now let's pull out some stories with that, and then we just walk through that. And I can really get that done in about 4 weeks. If we need to expedite that, I can make it sooner. If we want to make that longer, we can also make that longer. But usually about 4 weeks is what I need to help somebody go from no speech to a completed speech. Now, they may not be the best out there, but they'll be able to go out there and be able to give a speech that is clear and concise, and people will actually be able to take something away from it.
Awesome. So if people want to find more about you, where would they go?
You can go to speakingsessions.com. That's probably the best way. You can find me on really all social media platforms. Facebook and LinkedIn is where I hang out the most.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for Philip for being on the show. A lot of great information.
Yeah, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome.